Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to this week's episode of the Legal Beagle podcast. This week, we are joined by Mr. Kyle Bachus. Kyle has been an attorney for over 30 years working in plaintiffs' personal injury work. And Kyle had the most unthinkable thing happen to him within the last couple of years. And I have to say that reading his book called Unthinkable, and I'll put that up here on the screen for you guys all to see and a way for you guys to go pick up a copy, because it is probably the most thorough book that you may ever read about what to do after a catastrophic loss. But the story is personal to Kyle. It's about Kyle's mom. And I want to start off, Kyle, by welcoming you to the podcast, but also saying it was hard to read. And I'm sorry to hear about your mom.
Well, Jonathan, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I thank you for the opportunity. Of course, I wish that the circumstances that led to me putting this book together were different, but I appreciate the condolences.
Tell me why you decided to share this story. It's intimate, and you really spend time in the book talking about it. It becomes a very practical book in terms of the advice you give, but it's a personal story. And I put myself in your shoes, Kyle, and I was thinking about my very own mom, who's the same age as Margaret was when she passed. Why did you share the story, and why did you think this was the right vehicle to do it with?
I think what happened is here I had been, like you said, I'd been a personal injury lawyer representing families in this very circumstance for so many years. And as personal injury lawyers, in the back of our minds, we tread lightly and hope that we're never on the other end of that knock on the door or that call. And you see so many families and it's random, but you just hope it never happens to you. And I thought that I fully understood because of the years I'd spent representing families. I thought I fully understood the totality, of the circumstances. And then when we got that knock on the door and all of a sudden my own mom was killed while walking through a crosswalk and hit by a commercial vehicle, a concrete mixer truck of all things that, our family's life was thrown into chaos. And here I knew so much more about how to handle the legalities of this, but I didn't understand kind of the whole person, the holistic impact that this kind of event can have. And I think that my brother and sister were asking me questions, my family's asking me questions, and a lot of stuff is happening at a speed that you're just not ready for when this actually happens to your family. And I felt like there aren't any resources out there. And frankly, if you Google after something like this happens, what should I expect from the police investigation? Or I tried to send my relatives to places where they might look. What you find is a bunch of lawyer ads that almost congratulate you because somebody's been killed, and they want to talk about how much money they can get for you without addressing the things that are really going across somebody's mind and the needs that they have in the immediate aftermath, and really for quite some time after somebody's been killed. And so I felt like, who's better to tell the story than somebody who has experienced it, who can put it into context in kind of chronological order of things that come up, and the intertwining between the criminal justice system, the civil justice system, the probate law system, constitutional law system, all of these things that kind of impact the decisions that have to be made and have to be made rather quickly.
It's a great point, because I found myself, there was a section where you talked about grief counseling and reaching out to people to help you through this really traumatic time. That's not something I've seen in any of these books I've read a lot of books put out by other plaintiff attorneys talking about what to do after a catastrophic loss. This touched me in a different way because of the time you took, not only to tell your mother's story, but then to talk about the healing that has to happen, which kind of happens like as the investigation and as the claim itself is being pursued. And I think even attorneys that do this for a living forget that on the other end of this claim, on the other end of the potential civil recovery, are people that are hurting. and you were like exposed, and you were really honest. And I think that was a fascinating chapter to read, just because that's the thing that's forgotten by a lot of people. What made you be as bare and as just naked in terms of telling this story and talking about your personal aftermath of your mom's passing?
Well, I think I was still going through a process. When I read this book after I finished it and it's published and I look at it, it's somewhat of a time capsule for me because my mom was killed April the 28th of 2020, and by November of that year, I began working on this book and took up the better part of the next year. And I can tell you, having experienced this sort of catastrophic loss, and whether it's a death or a catastrophic injury, these life-changing events where things can't be fixed, that it's a long road. And so it's not a 3 or 4 month recovery. It's a year to 2 year recovery. And so I was talking about some of these things almost in real time as they were progressing. And so I think that allowed some vulnerability. But as you know, it's not a book. It's not my mom's story so much as the context of what my family went through in the bigger picture, to try to explain to those who are experiencing it as one audience, right? Clients who are experiencing it, to lay out, here's what you can expect in terms of this process. But for lawyers also to really start to appreciate what you said, Jonathan, which is there are people hurting. And while you think you're filling this one role, this one need of, we're going to talk to you about the civil justice system, it really is, it's better approached, and something I didn't realize until I experienced it. It's better approached to help people in this category with every aspect. Now, I don't mean you're doing the prosecution, of course, in the criminal case, because you're not, right? And I don't mean that you're the probate lawyer, because you're not. But understanding the needs associated with this process that leads to the civil justice system, I think is hugely important. And the big thing, I mean, a huge thing I can tell plaintiffs' lawyers that you may understand or think you understand, but you might miss a little bit, is that there is a need when the chaos hits a family to have some control over something. Like, especially those of us in the world who like to fix things. You see a problem, you like to fix it. What happens when you run up against a problem that is sudden, dramatic, catastrophic, and not fixable? You can't change the outcome. And people in that setting, I'm telling you from having experienced it and having watched my family experience it, you want to control something. Even if it's, you want to know what happened. How did this happen? Why did this happen? And that first interface, of course, is with the police department. And how often are we talking with families who have contacted us about what happens and what their expectations should be with the initial investigation, and why you might be, as you know from reading the book, why you're likely to be let down by that process, but how you can participate in it.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because we've had a lot of clients, Kyle, personally, that feel like the system has cheated them on the criminal justice side. And you talked about this. And I was like, wow, he gets it. Not only get it, you've experienced it, I'm sure, with your own set of clients, but now you personally had to deal with it. How do you help people appreciate that the system is there to help them, even though they feel cheated sometimes by what happens on the criminal side of things?
Yeah, I'll tell you. One of the things that I learned firsthand is what I kind of term the investigation lottery. And that is, what really happens is a 911 call comes in and somebody has to show up at the scene. And that depends upon where did it happen, what's the experience level of the police department that's responding, what are their resources, who's the officer who happens to be on duty that day, who is sent out to your call, who then takes over the investigation. And nothing against the police departments. They do a great job. We rely on them heavily. As you know, in our business, we rely on them and their work in many respects. But if it's a small town, they may have very little experience. The officer who goes out, who's going to be trying to identify all the evidence, that officer may have done this once or twice in their career, or they may have done it once or twice in the last week. And so you have to talk to your clients about that aspect, like who is going out there, because that may impact what you need to do to make sure that you get a secondary eye on that evidence. So that's number one. And I think the other thing that clients and my family certainly had a hard time understanding is, wait a second, somebody just killed my brother or killed my mother, like dead, killed them, and they're not going to jail? What do you mean they're not going to jail? And so just the appreciation and understanding, which I know we know as lawyers, but I'm not sure that we get on the granular level and explain to our clients that, the criminal justice system is mainly based upon prosecuting people who commit intentional acts. And unless somebody intentionally ran over your loved one, or unless they are drunk or a habitual traffic offender, depending on the state in which it occurred, it is very unlikely that the person who killed or catastrophically injured your loved one is going to spend any amount of time in jail, much less the amount of time that you as the family would like to see them spend to have some measure of justice for what they just did and took away from your family. And so making sure that our clients understand that there's negligence and then there's intentional conduct, and the mens rea that we learn about in law school, how important that is to what happens in the criminal justice system. And then also understanding within those limitations, you still do have some important rights.
Let me ask about a chapter where you talk about fleeting evidence. And I'm going to give you a scenario that we've faced ourselves, and I'm sure you have, where the client comes in and it's been a year since the tragedy and they needed time to grieve. And I respect that. And they don't understand that in that passage of 1 year, a lot of evidence is gone forever. Can you talk about the importance of fleeting evidence and why you need to wrap your arms around stuff quickly?
Yeah, and I think this is an important aspect, hopefully, for the readers of this book, who may become clients who may not understand what we know and what you know, Jonathan, which is, the moment that the road is reopened, from that moment forward, there's a degradation of evidence, and it, especially depending on climate. Especially depending upon changes to roadways and tracking down witnesses and video. In my mother's case, thankfully, there was actually a lawyer who was at the intersection, stopped at a stoplight with a Garmin facing out that caught the whole event on video. And there was a video from restaurants. But you got to find these people, and you got to find the restaurants, and you got to find the video, and you got to get that video downloaded before it goes away. And you got to make sure that the vehicles involved, you would think that if there's a commercial vehicle involved in a fatality, that vehicle is going to be impounded so that you can get what we, generically call the black box evidence off of the vehicle, but don't count on it. I mean, in my mom's situation, before the family was ever informed, it took 5 hours for them to notify us. The truck company had their safety crew already out there, and they talked the police into allowing them to take the vehicle, and that they would, because the vehicle was too large. It was a big 43,000 pound concrete mixer truck, and where was the city going to store it? And so these are things that are happening in real time, and so the importance of making sure that the message, if you want to communicate with people, let's say you're building a website or you want to communicate about, and you're a lawyer, rather than talking about how you're going to get somebody paid in this instance, I think it's better to arm people with the information about what do you need to do today and why is it that you need to do it today as opposed to tomorrow, because it's very difficult. When people are literally trying to make it through first the next minute, then the next hour, and then the next day of their life, taking on even just the task of trying to pick up a phone and call a lawyer for assistance, maybe something they just don't feel like they're up to. And I think the more of us who, as lawyers, can make it clear that we're here to, uh, you know, not actually hold them, but to hold and help our clients in this time of need through a process that is, maybe they have a case, maybe they don't have a case, but the way to find out is to get to work on it immediately.
That's an important distinction. The idea of the ambulance chaser is one that is out in society, and I think that until someone has dealt with this, and I've had clients after we've wrapped up a case telling me I thought this was going to be so different than it was. I didn't think it was going to be there was going to be so much counseling involved. We really put the counselor into the work that we do, and I don't mean mental health, and I'm not a trained professional in that, but the idea of just holding their hand, as you just said, and walking them through the process. Now, Kyle, you had the benefit, your law partner, Darren Shanker, who you guys have been practicing for a long time together. You said in the book, he immediately had boots on the ground and had experts there and was able to kind of take on the legal aspect of this. Well, you and the family just tried to wrap your head around what had just happened to your mom. For those people out there that are listening to this, that I'm talking to non-attorneys, how do they find someone? How do they find someone to help them? You were fortunate. You had on speed dial a guy who's been doing this a long time, just like you. If they don't have that, how do they find someone?
Yeah, and let me say this about my situation. You would think, because I do this for a living, that one of the first things that would come to my mind is we better go secure the evidence at the scene. I can tell you that I was in shock, like any other family member who loses a close relative. And really, my law partner reached out to me by phone, within 24 hours, I think within 12 hours, and said, Kyle, I think we need to find out what happened down there. And I don't want you to do anything other than just say, go. And I'm going to find out what happened to your mom. And I said, go. But I don't think I would have done that in the time frame. It wasn't top of mind. Top of mind was I just lost my mom. My kids just lost their grandmother. And so you're not engaged in that sort of thought, but you have to face, you have to understand the fleeting nature of the evidence. And so I had that. So what I would say is it's very important to find people who have experience in doing this sort of investigation for you, people who will and are willing to hold your hand, and people who are willing to front the cost of an investigation. An investigation could end up in a determination that there's no case at all. One of the terrible things about a catastrophic injury or death case is that the person who was there, who could help provide evidence about what happened, is dead, right? And the person who, especially if it's a pedestrian setting, the person who who caused this is not dead, and they quickly understand the severity of what's occurred. And so I'm not saying that people intentionally manipulate the evidence, but there certainly is a reason to be concerned if you are on the cause end of these things, right? And so I think it's extremely important to try to find a law firm that has experience, and I think it's okay to ask the questions, just like you should ask of the police department. I talk about it in the book. It's okay to talk to the police department about how many of these do you guys work on? What's the level of experience? Who's going to be dealing with this case? What level of attorney is going to be assisting me? And what's the path that we're gonna take? And I think the first path is secure the evidence, right? Different decisions can be made after evidence is secured on how far somebody wants to take it. You might have clients who come to you and say, I just don't know. I'm not the kind of person who brings a claim, but you don't know when this happens to you, the totality of the impact on your life and your family, and you're in no position to be making those real long-term decisions about the conclusion of a case at the very beginning. But you do need to be making the decision to reach out to somebody who is qualified, experienced, that's willing to front the costs, that has the relationships with the engineers and the private investigators who can hit the street and say, all I want you to do right now is please, let's go ahead and enter into an attorney-client relationship, and let's preserve the evidence. Or if you're not ready for that, I also offer some self-help sort of advice in the book about how you can locate professional engineers and private investigators on your own to start that process to secure the evidence. I think that the benefit of going through a lawyer, of course, is that the law firm has those relationships and can probably mobilize the people that you need in a much quicker fashion than you can. You can do it yourself, regardless of whether it's through a law firm or kind of the helping yourself. I think it's important to secure that evidence.
You know, you bring up a good point. You kind of give the reader in this book the playbook on certain aspects of what you may experience and what you may need to be aware of. And now I put my attorney hat back on and I'm like, Kyle just gave away the secret sauce. Why did you? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I actually was really impressed. It was refreshing to see you saying, look, and there is a bunch at the back end of this book of references and sample letters and statutes. I mean, you spent a lot of time, a lot of research, a lot of work went into this. Why give all that away? You could have easily just pointed the finger back to, hey, call me. I've been through it. I can help you. Why did you choose to say that's not the way I'm going to share this information with the public?
The real answer is that the reason that I wrote the book was to help even one family. You know, when you sit down and start talking with publishing houses and companies about what you're trying to write and why you're trying to write it, you know, I was honest with them. I said, you know, my goal is that some family, if one family experiences the kind of loss that we know is going to happen and can get some measure of control by having this book as a guide for them, then it's a successful book from my perspective. Now, that may not be what publishers want to hear, but I can tell you that is exactly the conversation that I had with them, is that I'm writing the book to help people understand a process, because when it happened to my family and I went on Amazon and I went on Google to try to get resources for my family, I mean, certainly I can talk with them and provide insight, but you know, when you're not sleeping, and you're not sleeping, I can tell you that. And when you're grasping for something, and so resources are important, and there are not. Certainly before this book, I'm not aware of any actual resource that provides the kind of information and insight into the process that is likely to follow after something occurs in a straightforward way. And so that's why I wrote it. And I wanted to be truthful, and I wanted to be honest, and I wanted to put it all out there. And I wrote it strictly for purposes of trying to help people and to get the message out. And that's why I'm here, is sharing it with other lawyers and sharing it with your audience as well, because I want people to have access to this as a resource, because I think it's a helpful resource.
It's a great word, resource. I thought when I read it, I was like, wow, any new attorney that comes in my firm and wants to understand how to handle catastrophic loss, I'm going to hand them your book and say, read Kyle's book. And it's so in depth. But you know what you did? You had a nice balance of humanity in the book. And I'll point to one chapter I picked up on. You're talking about April and Addie and the practicality of that and the reality of that. Tell the audience the story of April and Addie and what you guys had to do to help them find a good home.
Yeah, April and Addie were my mom's cats, and my mom loved these cats, and we love these cats. Unfortunately, the life circumstances of our various households with other pets that already existed in the houses, we weren't in a position to take my mom's cats. Well, what do you do? That's one of the immediate things that you have to ask. Well, what do you do? And I think for the legally untrained client, whose responsibility are the cats might also be an issue, right? Because there could be a will, right, that says who gets the cats. If there's not, are cats personal property? Are they some other kind of property? So that's an example of trying to cover both from the legal perspective, what the responsibility is, and then the human perspective, which is, oh my God, we wanted my mom's cats to go to the same person. We wanted a household. How do you find a household that can take both of these cats? And this is they literally. My mom went out for a walk, didn't come home, and these cats were left alone all night. And by the time that my sister went there in the morning, they're hungry. They don't know where my mom is, and this is an immediate problem. And so, thankfully, through social media and contacts, we were able to find a retired couple who were the parents of one of my mom's friends, who were former college professors who were just retiring, and they were actually getting ready to go get a cat, not two cats, but they were going to get one cat. And they graciously said that they would take care of my mom's cats. And so then you look for, well, what are the vet records? Well, I don't know what vet my mom was taking the cats to. And you go through a whole process of calling all of the vets around to see if they're there or when they've been there. And unfortunately, we were unable to locate a vet. So we took the cats in and got them checked out and got all their shots, and offered to provide a lifetime of food for the family if they wanted to. And they declined. And really, for the better part of the first year after my mom had been killed, we would periodically get photos of these cats adapting to their life in their new adopted home, and it helped us feel good about that. That is like such a huge thing, but at the same time, it's such a one small piece of the 1,000 things that you have to confront.
Yeah, but that's so personal to those that have to deal with a tragedy like this. And I think back, you had a chapter about what to do with outstanding bills. And my dad passed away years ago before I became an attorney. He died of cancer. And I remember my brother, sister, and I looking at each other. Do we pay these? Do we have them these credit cards like shifted into our names? And you go and you offer some really good, practical, sound advice on what to do in these situations. To say that this is a all-encompassing resource is an understatement, Kyle. You really spent some time going through each aspect of things. This is not for those attorneys that will pick it up, and I urge those attorneys to pick it up, and I'll put the link up on the podcast and where you can go get it. But it's not just a to Z guide on what to deal with from a legal standpoint. It's an A to Z, on what to deal with life. You talk about social media. You talked about how to deal with funeral expenses, and you talked about victim advocacy, which I hear no one talk about, and the idea of restitution. How much research did you do to pull all these things into one cohesive book that people could actually read?
Well, I will tell you, that part of this book was made easy for me because these are the things that actually came up along the way. And then most of them are very personal things that we had to deal with. And then it opened my eyes, going through the process, opened my eyes to the probate needs. And so then I sat down. I have very good friends who are probate lawyers, and said, hey, what are the top things that you would like people to understand? And we were facing them in my own life. I didn't know, I knew that that the estate might be responsible for the bills, but I didn't know what was the appropriate way to handle the bills that were coming in. And these are real life. Medical bills that might be collateral to the event. What do you do with any bill that comes in? The credit card bills, or do you pay them? Do you not pay them? And so I got really good advice, and it worked. And for those bills, the advice was very simple: get the mail forwarded, get it forwarded to you, but don't put or associate your name with it. Just get the mail forwarded to you, to another address, so you can see from your mom what is coming in. And then as those bills come in, take a copy of the death certificate, put it in there, notify the creditor that she's been killed, and leave it at that and see what happens next. And if an estate has to be opened, then notice has to go out, certainly, but there's a timing related to all of those things. That's something that I I mean, I took estates and trusts in law school. I think that was in year 1990, right? So, uh, and I have some exposure to it because of what I do for a living. But the intricacies of and the practicalities of how to deal with the bills as they come in, unrelated to the crash, unrelated to the event, um, I, I learned as I went. And I will tell you, you mentioned victims advocates and the victims, rights. When you get notified of a death, somebody walks up and literally knocks on your door, hands you their card, and after they hand you their card, they say, your mom's body's been taken to the medical examiner's office, and here's a number you can reach them. Please let us know if you need anything further, right? And that's the police interaction. And that's their job, and they're doing what they can do. What else can they do? But your life changes immediately, forever, the moment that occurs. And the lifeline for many families in the criminal justice system are these victims advocates. And these victims advocates who are literally there to help find resources for your clients at no charge to your clients, at no charge to people. If you face this yourself and you're not a lawyer, they're there to help for free. Why are they there? Well, the reason that they're there is almost every state has adopted, either constitutionally, changed their own state constitution, or they've adopted a law to provide rights to victims of crime. And you might not think of a car crash as that you're a crime victim. Well, you're wrong. In almost every state, inclusive of these statutes, when they identify in the law, who qualifies as a victim, you'll see careless driving resulting in serious bodily injury or death, or some language similar to that, in almost every state qualifies you as a crime victim and gives you the ability to use victims advocates who will help you all the way understand the criminal justice process, work beside you, provide you with services for counseling, in the community. They're well connected, and they're there because in most states, there's a requirement that they not only do criminals have rights, we all hear about the rights of criminals, the right to remain silent, all of these rights, but crime victims have rights. And it really started, I talk about it in the book when I was doing the research on the history of it, Ronald Reagan, right? Ronald Reagan gets shot. Hinckley, who shoots him, there's a lot of rights that Hinckley gets. Reagan was surprised by how few rights he had as a victim of that crime, and put on the national stage the need for the enactment of, and it wasn't just Reagan, but he was a promulgator of these statutes that really have taken hold in all the states. And so, although we're going to be disappointed most likely with the criminal justice system and the outcome in that system because of what we discussed previously, you're not going to be disappointed in your rights to participate in the process. It doesn't mean you get to make the decisions that the prosecutor makes, but it does mean that you have a right to be heard, you have a right to be informed, you have a right to be present, and you have access to victims advocates. And in many states, a victims compensation fund that's paid for every time somebody pays a traffic ticket. Money's going in to pay for this fund. In Colorado, where I live, it's up to $30,000 in coverage for crime victims, to pay for wage loss, to pay for travel expenses, to pay for funeral expenses, to pay for counseling. And when we go back to the lawyer set, right, this kind of lawyer as the counselor, that, as you described it, Jonathan, if we're not talking to our clients about what is available from these other resources, and we're considering the magnitude of the loss that the families are suffering, I think that we're not doing all that we can do to be that counselor to them. We don't have to serve as the victim's advocate, but we should be talking to our clients about how to resource those people. So these are things that I didn't know. I knew some of it. I knew pieces of it, but I didn't understand how helpful they can be, and what a great resource to our communities.
You could have gone another 10 chapters now talking about the legal side of when a case begins to when a case resolves, whether you take it all the way through jury trial or not. And you chose not to do that. And I'm wondering, when you sat down to architect this book, Kyle, what made you not put that in there? I know there are resources out there and there are a lot of different thoughts on how to do that, but you could have made this another couple hundred pages just talking about the legal side of this. And you do talk a lot about the legal side. I don't want to suggest that you don't, but the step-by-step approach to how to handle a catastrophic injury claim. Why did you not put that in the book?
So, as you say, there is certainly a chapter on the civil justice system that talks about what you can accomplish and why you might choose to use that civil justice system, and how that is really the place where you can have the most control. That is in there, but you're absolutely right. There's not it's not overly comprehensive, because I feel like there are great resources available in every community. I know many great, terrific lawyers all around the country. There are great lawyers who can sit down and walk people through the intricacies that go beyond the overview that I provide of the expectations of your particular case in the civil justice system. I wanted people to understand how the civil justice system interacts with the criminal justice system. I wanted people to understand the importance of that system to us and how to access it. But I felt like there are a lot of resources, and namely, there are a lot of great lawyers. If somebody decides, I understand in a general overview what to expect from the civil justice system, and I want to go access it, I feel like there are people who they can access who can assist them in understanding those intricacies. And I also there was great intention in trying to create a book that was about 200 pages or less in length, and that is, I didn't want people who are already overwhelmed to feel overwhelmed by the uh, by the depth of the content. You know, we've all read books where you're like, that's a really great subject and I'm super interested in it. But by 6 pages in, you're like, man, okay, it's taking me like 4 hours to read 6 pages. I think I'm going to switch over and find another resource. Right. And so I thought that the information about the way that things happen and the chronology of the process through the criminal justice system, your grief, your restitution, all of these things. It was important to make sure that people had the knowledge that they needed without overwhelming people with content that was too in depth. That's really what it was, and so it was very intentional. It's interesting that you pick up on that, because it's what I do every day in that chapter. And I could write a book about that. But you know what? I've been doing that for 30 years. I've never written a book about that. I was writing a book about what I saw as a hole that needs to be filled in helping people through the understanding of a much more holistic process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you laid it out quite nicely. And I found myself even being educated on certain things that clients have asked that I hadn't really thought about how to deal with. And I think it's a great resource for those that are practicing in this profession, and certainly for those that have gone through any sort of tragedy in their life. The book is called Unthinkable. I will put a link up on how to get a copy of it. I suggest you read it. It is not too dense for the non-lawyer. It is certainly a terrific resource for the lawyer. And at the end, I'm not going to ruin this because I think you should read it. There's a really nice tribute to Margaret and her legacy. And there's some fascinating things that Kyle shared with you, the reader, about her, and that I think are neat to learn. I don't want to talk about those because I think people should read it. I think it's a nice little treat at the end of the book. And then again, there's sample letters for those that might need those. There's links to different resources. Kyle, I thank you for writing a book like this. I think it'll help not only our profession, it'll help humanity in general. It'll help those people that need to cope with these sorts of tragedies that will continue to be part of our everyday lives. Before I let you go, I end every podcast the same. I do what's called Fast Five. It's just 5 questions for you to answer. Will you indulge me in these fast 5 questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Number 1, if you didn't become a lawyer, what would you be?
Wow. Maybe something in the theater. I don't know.
Really? Like an
Yeah.
actor?
Maybe somewhere, something in the theater. Yeah. I mean, that really is what comes to mind. I have an interest in theater in general. So maybe that would be it.
Okay. Being that you live in Colorado, have you ever had Rocky Mountain oysters?
I have never had Rocky Mountain oysters.
That makes 2 of us.
Early on, there were attempts to trick me into having Rocky Mountain oysters, but I did not find myself so gullible.
Where you mentioned in the book, you talk about your brother and sister. Where do you fall in that pecking order? Are you the oldest, youngest, middle?
I'm the middle kid. My
Just like
older
me.
brother, yeah, my older brother's a doctor, and so is my younger sister. So I'm truly the black sheep of the family.
Oh yeah, you went and became an attorney. How dare you? 4th question. What is the biggest misconception about personal injury attorneys?
That they are not in it to help people.
I love that. Final question. 1 word. Fill in the blank. The world needs more blank.
Peace. Peace.
Oh, what a fantastic word. So true. Kyle Bachus, the book is called Unthinkable. I really enjoyed reading it. Thank you for sending me a copy. I would tell everyone out there to pick it up and read it yourselves. It'll hit home for a variety of reasons. If you've had any loved ones that are still walking around, because you said in the book that taking a minute to appreciate what we have is so very important in life, because it can change in an instant. And that was evident in your situation. And as I said, I'm sorry I didn't get to meet your mom. We probably wouldn't have met otherwise. But I really hope that you feel honored and you feel like that somehow her legacy lives on through the words that you shared with all of us. So thank you for writing this book.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you having me.